This is Elizabeth Clower, and this is my paper presentation for LIS 770, Patron Privacy in Public Libraries. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the ALA's stance on privacy, which I'm assuming you all know. The ALA is part of their Bill of Rights, affirms an ethical imperative to provide unrestricted access and to guard against impediments to open inquiry. The ALA has recently updated their privacy guidelines. The guidelines include, and this is specifically for public access computers, gives best practice policies for privacy policies, access control, display screens, etc. You can read it. It's not necessarily just about patrons' names and whatnot, but it's the entire experience around a patron accessing, using computers, the internet, computer networks, etc. So you'll see there's guidelines around malware and whatnot. So the idea is that librarians have an ethical responsibility to preserve the user's rights to privacy. The libraries and librarians also have a legal obligation to protect library users' personally identifiable information and data from unauthorized disclosure and use. One of the ways that patron's personal information might be exposed is via the Patriot Act. Patriot Act, I'm assuming most of you know, was passed originally back in, I believe, 2001 after 9/11. It was updated in 2006. What we're concerned is Section 215, which is what's commonly called the library provision. Under that provision, law enforcement, primarily FBI, must provide a subpoena if they want to obtain library records. Without a subpoena, a library cannot disclose patron records or staff records. And the library staff, if they are given a subpoena to disclose patron information, the library staff may not disclose or discuss that they have been served a subpoena. That's called the gag rule. Libraries have found different ways of getting around that, one of which being sometimes they will say no subpoenas were served, which means if they're not saying that, a subpoena was served. So there are different ways of getting around that. But the Patron Act is one way that patrons' privacies are compromised. So again, this is some of the ways that libraries respond to the Patriot Act. One is to make sure that the library has a robust privacy policy. That's probably your first line of defense. But the other ways are in terms of collecting information, destroying or deleting information, making sure that the library only has the information that it absolutely needs to do its work to ensure patron privacy. Okay, the other thing is the Patriot Act is a federal law, but Illinois also has a law under the Illinois compiled statutes. The Illinois Local Library Law, also known as the Library Records Confidentiality Act, specifically states that registration and circulation records are confidential information and cannot be accessed without a court order. Federal law would trump the state law, but again, they would still need that subpoena. Additionally, there is Illinois state law that exempts library circulation and order records identifying library users with specific materials from the Freedom of Information Act. So that's important to remember. Library privacy policies. So as I said, under the ALA guidelines, best practice, this is one of the first defenses against invasion of patron privacy. Under the ALA guidelines, they state the privacy policies should be made easily available and understandable to users. So as a managerial issue, one of the things that you'd have to think about is what does easily available and understandable mean? What are you going to include in them? What aren't you? And how are you going to include that information? For example, this is the privacy policies that I just simply went online and got from the Schaumburg Township District Library and from the Palatine Public Library District. you can see the Schomburg's policy is bullet point. This is just one small paragraph out of the entire policy, information we collect, and then it bullet points some of the information they collect. Palatine, on the other hand, their policy is much more dense. They include lots more information, and the information is given in paragraph style instead of bullet style. So this is just a management decision that has to be made. How dense is your policy going to be? How explicit is your policy going to be? And how are you going to format it? Okay, ways to ensure patron privacy online. There are different ways of doing this in the library. One of the ways is to have HTTPS protocols on all library computers. HTTPS is a secured communication protocol, and what it does is it ensures, as I said here, confidentiality, authenticity, and integrity. What that means is confidentiality basically means no one can eavesdrop on you while you're transmitting information between you and the website you're visiting. Authenticity means that the site that you're visiting is actually what it claims to be. And integrity means that there is encryption around your transmission so that attackers can't get in and hijack what it is you're trying to transmit or information you're trying to receive or whatnot. So this is one way to ensure patron privacy online. And it's a relatively easy thing for libraries to do, again, depending on how big or small the library is, how much IT support it has, but it really should probably be standard operating procedure for most middle-sized libraries and certainly any large library. Another way of ensuring patron privacy is by using something called Tor. Tor is also called the Onion Router, but it's an anonymous web browser. So instead of using Chrome, instead of using Safari or Firefox, they would use Tor. A library patron would use Tor. This is advocated by the Library Freedom Project, not for all computers in the public library, but for maybe a couple or a couple of designated computers. What it does is it allows the user to be completely anonymous when they're browsing online. And the way it does that is by taking the user's traffic and bouncing it all globally, all over the place, so that it can't be tracked. And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the simple way of explaining it. The downfall with Tor is that because it is completely anonymous, it can be used for criminal activity and is sometimes used for criminal activity. One of the other problems with Tor is that people assume when they're using Tor that they are completely anonymous online. Occasionally that is not true. Hackers can occasionally get in and eavesdrop or intercept information on Tor, and government entities, especially the NSA, Homeland Security, whatnot, are trying very, very, very hard to crack Tor so that they can actually get in and track people online. So Tor is great. It's not an answer for everything, and you have to understand the pros and cons of using it in a library. One of the next issues around patron privacy in libraries is this new move towards Library 2.0. So as libraries, as we try to stay relevant with this digital world that we now live in, we want to provide patrons with services and opportunities such as real-time reference support, certainly the increased use of social media, things like personalized recommended reading lists through Reader's Advisory. These are all great and patrons love it. Tagging on a catalog, putting recommendations on a catalog, these kind of things, ratings systems. These are great, but they do have privacy implications. So for example, right, if you're providing real-time reference support, well, that might require a patron's name or an email address, and it would track a date and time. It would also potentially track the content of the conversation between the patron and the librarian. Social media. So the con of this would be that it gives the library lots of potential access to personal information. The problem with this is then if this information is collected, stored, available, if law enforcement comes to the library with a subpoena, that information is then available to be divulged. Whereas if this information is never collected, never tracked in the first place, then obviously we have nothing to give to law enforcement if they ask us. With the caveat, of course, that law enforcement is doing their job as well, and we do have an ethical duty to help them in their process. So, some management issues around these, obviously creating and writing the policy. Privacy policy, some libraries actually have a Patriot Act policy where they're very explicit about what the Patriot Act is and how they handle it at their library. Staff training, what records do we keep, how do we keep them, when do we delete them, etc. Coordination with IT staff, again, especially in setting up HTTPS or Tor systems on the computer, but also in terms of the vending contract, the contracts with third-party vendors for databases and whatnot that the library actually puts on their websites, and then what are the privacy issues around that. And then obviously implementing new programs and services, as I mentioned, some of the new personalized recommended reading programs, some of the Library 2.0 issues, and then their privacy implications. Finally, I found this